Now we're going to focus on events in Israel and Gaza. Dozens of people are reported to have been killed in the latest wave of Israeli strikes across Gaza, with the Hamas-run civil defence agency putting the number of deaths at 94. Eyewitnesses say there have been airstrikes and shelling from artillery and tanks, with some of the heaviest bombardments in and around the Jabalia refugee camp in the north of Gaza. Israel says its operations target what it describes as Hamas terrorists and says it has issued evacuation orders to civilians ahead of the attacks. Well, for the next half an hour, we'll be looking at the situation in detail. But what do we know about some of these latest Israeli strikes on Gaza? Here's BBC Verify's Merlin Thomas.
Over a 24-hour period, Israel intensified its strikes in Gaza, hitting 2 hospitals as well as Jabalia in the north. Israel says it was conducting strikes against Hamas fighters and infrastructure. We verified the strikes of the 2 hospitals here, the European Hospital and the Nasser Hospital. They're both in southern Gaza. Let's start with the European Hospital, which was hit Tuesday evening local time. Multiple bombs were dropped simultaneously, leaving large plumes of smoke rising from the hospital site. The attack killed and injured dozens of people, according to the Hamas-run civil defence agency. And you can see just how deep the impact of those bombs are in this video. And here's the aftermath, which shows a damaged bus hanging inside a crater. This video was filmed in the hospital's courtyard. In total, we've counted and verified 7 craters around the hospital building, which we've mapped out here. Munitions expert Trevor Ball told BBC Verify that so-called bunker buster bombs were likely used in this strike. These are a type of weapon designed to penetrate underground targets like a tunnel system. Israel has previously used them to kill senior Hezbollah figures, including former leader Hassan Nasrallah, in Beirut last year. Now, Israeli media reported that the target of the European hospital strike was senior Hamas figure Mohammed Sinwar, the younger brother of the former Hamas leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, who was killed by the IDF in October. But the IDF haven't yet commented. Now, Israel says it targeted an underground terrorist infrastructure at the hospital site, but they didn't provide any evidence of this. They did release this video, which they claimed was of the European hospital, but that's incorrect. It's actually a school a few hundred meters away, and we've reached out to the Israeli army for comment about this, but we've not yet heard back. Now, in the early hours of Tuesday morning, the Israeli army also struck another hospital, the Nasser Hospital, with a different munition. We verified this footage of smoke billowing from the 4th floor window of the hospital after the strike. Images like this, shared online, also show substantial damage inside the hospital building. Hassan Asleh, a journalist who has reported extensively from Gaza for many years, was at the hospital receiving treatment at the time of the attack. Verified video of the aftermath confirmed he was killed at the scene. Now, Israel has accused Asleh of direct involvement in the 7th of October attacks. He reported on the assault and shared photos of himself at the scene. Israel strikes have killed around 100 people over a 24-hour period in these 2 hospital strikes, as well as in Jabalia, footage of which you can see here. This comes at a moment when the UN's head of humanitarian affairs has called on world leaders to prevent, in his words, genocide.
Merlin Thomas there from BBC Verify. Well, joining me now are Paul Adams, our diplomatic correspondent, Yolan Nell, who's in Jerusalem, and Rushdie Abu Alouf, our Gaza correspondent. And Rushdie, just first of all, on the toll on human life and injuries that we are seeing, do we know, are there any numbers from any side as to how many of those people are Hamas supporters or members and how many are civilians?
Well, the hospitals usually do not issue this kind of details about who's targets and who's killed. As far as we know, the about 103 people were killed just since midnight. I mean, the latest airstrike in the north killed about 13 people. 6 of them are children. The place described by one of the local journalists in the north as a building housing a prayer hall and a charity clinic in the place. But if you look at the number of civilian casualties among 100 people, only in Nasser hospital issue a statement saying that 50% of those killed in the last 36 hours were women and children. Of course, Israel said that they are targeting Hamas, and in fact, yes, they did. In many strikes, they have targeted Hamas, but the number of civilian casualties are rising in a very sharp way since the attack on the European hospital yesterday.
Yolan Nel in Jerusalem, we've heard multiple reports of Israel building up its military operation. What is known so far on that?
So basically, the Israeli Security Cabinet has approved this plan for an intense military offensive in the Gaza Strip that would forcibly displace the population to the southern part and would see a takeover of aid distribution by a newly created foundation, we believe, working with private security companies, with the Israeli military in the periphery, providing further security. That has proved to be extremely controversial. We've had the UN and other humanitarian partners who have been working in Gaza rejecting any cooperation with that, suggesting it would be a weaponization of aid. And that threat to carry out that wider offensive is really still hanging there as President Trump is visiting the region, with Israeli sources indicating that they're ready to begin that offensive once he leaves.
And Paul Adams, we've seen that Donald Trump hasn't visited Israel on this trip. Has there been any negotiation possibility whilst Trump is in the region? And is there any possibility of Israel not going ahead with that military operation?
Well, certainly there have been negotiations going on. There indeed has been a meeting in Doha, in Qatar, involving Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's envoy, an Israeli delegation, and Qatari mediators. The details of those negotiations are not clear. This seems to be once again an attempt to get some kind of formula that would see a return to the phased end to the conflict, with Hamas releasing a number of hostages in return for Israel's military withdrawal, gradual withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Now, we've seen these formulas discussed over and over and over again in recent months. It was a kind of impatience on the part of the Israeli government that saw the end of the first ceasefire back in at the beginning of March. And so I don't think hopes are particularly high that Mr. Witkoff is going to pull off another deal that would see a suspension of Israel's military operation. At the moment, Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, seems absolutely hell-bent on launching this major intervention, which some dire predictions have suggested could see the almost complete evacuation of the northern part of the Gaza Strip and the destruction of pretty much the remaining civilian infrastructure there, with civilians huddled in the south and getting aid from the new setup that Yolan was just describing, if indeed that Gaza Humanitarian Foundation scheme ever gets off the ground. So yes, there is a negotiation going on. We have not seen Donald Trump personally getting involved in it. His hosts around the Gulf will have been urging him to use whatever pressure he can to bring this about. But time is running out to prevent this major military escalation.
And Yolan Nel, just to try to understand Netanyahu's motivation here, it was very striking during the last US administration that Antony Blinken, as he was parting, he made a number of speeches and he said that despite the numbers of Hamas fighters who had been killed, by American accounts, there was still almost the same number coming through to replace those people. Is the argument within Israel still, and does it have popular support, that Hamas can effectively be totally wiped out, or is there much more complex politics at play about Netanyahu's survival?
I mean, definitely there are complex politics going on here. It remains Israel's stated war goal that it wants to dismantle Hamas in terms of its governing capabilities and in terms of its fighting capabilities in the Gaza Strip, to completely remove the threat from Hamas. But you have seen, particularly when it comes to the hostages, this issue in the Israeli public, a shift. You know, it's thought that at least 23 Israeli hostages are still alive, up to 23, in the Gaza Strip, being held by Hamas. And opinion polls suggest that about 2/3 of the Israeli public would be prepared to have concessions, to see an end to the war, and to prioritise bringing back those hostages that are still alive. That is really sort of a big point, a big division in Israel at the moment, because on the other hand, you have the Israeli government that is really wedded to this idea of an expanding military offensive. Of course, you have the hardliners in the government who also talk ultimately enthusiastically about Israel taking over the Gaza Strip to have an indefinite military occupation there, and ultimately they want to see the re-establishment of Jewish settlements. And they talk very enthusiastically about President Trump's plan of really, you know, persuading the population of Gaza, more than 2 million people, to leave the Strip. And there have been suggestions again in the Israeli parliament in recent days that is something that Israel is really actively pursuing, is looking for other countries that would take in Gazans. They're portraying this as being a voluntary emigration program, but you know, humanitarian officials say this would be anything but, because the conditions that are being created in Gaza at the moment are really making it unlivable.
And Rushdie Aboulouf, our Gaza correspondent, is it possible to assess really how people are feeling? We've seen obviously desperate images of people, many reports of people struggling for food and their basics. But is there any sign of people wanting to leave, to escape this current crisis? And is Hamas still being supported by large parts of the population there?
Well, it is very frustrating events in Gaza, especially after a very little window of hope when Trump visited the area. The departure of Trump from Qatar today without any achievement when it comes to the ceasefire was a very frustrating. But also when I was talking to people like almost every day about the idea of evacuating Gaza to the north, to the south, if Israel started the operation, many of them said that we are not going to repeat what they call the mistake they have done back in October 2023 when they left Gaza and the north to the south. One of them is like 74 years old man. He said, I was one of the first few people to leave with 60 members of my family, but he said killing is everywhere. He said members of my family were killed in a place called the safe zone in Al-Mawasi, that we were ordered by the Israelis to go there. So people are not really obeyed with the daily evacuation orders. For example, yesterday, Israel published a map for like 5-6 places. And when I talked to the people, they ordered them to evacuate. When I talked to the people this morning, very few people left these areas, and people know the risk and people know that they might be killed. But they said the killing is everywhere. Today, for example, 56 people were killed in Khan Yunis. It's the place where Israel would ideally ask people to live there. So there is no safe zone. That's the word that the Palestinians keep repeating, not only this time, but since the beginning of the war.
But what about actually leaving Gaza itself? Is that something that more people will want to do, given the desperate conditions they're facing?
Well, yes, most people want to leave Gaza. I mean, the people post in social media expressing their willingness to go somewhere safe. We have seen 100,000 people already left Gaza since the war. Most of them are here in Egypt, and some of them want to return back. I mean, the issue for the Palestinians is they want to return, they want to leave, but they want to have the right to return, and they believe this time if they leave Gaza, they won't be able to go back. With others, many others, they believe that they will stand in their lands, whether it's airstrike or evacuation order or whatever. So the people are divided about this issue. But yes, in fact, when we talk to people, when we follow people on social media, many people wanted to leave Gaza.
Rushdie, Yolande and Paul, do stay with us. We are going to focus further on Gaza, but I just want to bring in another report, because Israel doesn't allow independent access to the enclave for international journalists from media organisations, including the BBC. The latest group of children who've been evacuated for medical treatment have arrived in Jordan. 4 children and 12 parents flew to the capital Amman, from where our special correspondent Fergal Keane sent this report. A warning, his report does contain upsetting images.
In the late evening light, a journey into the skies. For those who've known only the shrinking ground of Gaza for the last 19 months. Sama, 9 years old, with a brain tumour. What's it like in Gaza?
Horrible. No words can describe how much horrible it is, like on all levels.
This is a happy moment for these children and their parents. They've travelled all day. They've come from a place of hunger and death. Now this helicopter is going to take them to Amman, where they'll get the best possible cancer treatment. Safa Salah with her son Yusuf heading for treatment. She wanted me to read a message. It is hard to imagine what these sights mean to eyes that have looked only on desolation. In the place they left, this, carnage left by a different aircraft. A hospital bombed by Israel. The CCTV camera capturing the moment of impact and aftermath.
Absolutely massive strike on EGH hospital. This is right in front of the emergency room.
The Israelis allege the leader of Hamas was hiding in a bunker under the hospital. 28 people were killed, dozens wounded.
So standing outside the operation theatre, you can see the damage behind me. It's not even possible to take any cases to theatre because it's too dangerous.
In Amman, the families who've escaped for now, the horror of what's happening in Gaza. It is new and strange here, but they will meet other Gazan evacuees who've already come. Like Habiba al-Askari, who was brought to Jordan in January with gangrene in 2 of her arms and a leg. On the chopper to Amman, I saw a child frightened and seriously ill. This is Habiba today. A triple amputee. Doctors could not save her limbs, but she's a determined child and adapting. Her mum Rana wants her someday to go home. To me, Gaza will always be beautiful, the most beautiful place on this earth, says Rana. But home to war or peace, nobody knows. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Amman.
Well, the BBC website has a live page on the situation in Gaza running today with our team of correspondents in the region, including just one float. I just want to bring you to one excerpt there from our correspondent Alice Cuddy, who spoke to or was in touch with one family there in Gaza, a nurse and a mother of 2, Roa Mohsen. And Alice was asking her about how she's coping on a daily basis, feeding 2 young daughters aged 3 and 18 months in the war zone and under blockade, talking about how much food they have and how she's coping. It's worth a read as one part of the live page. And I just want to bring in our correspondents more on this question now. Paul Adams, our diplomatic correspondent, Yolande Nell in Jerusalem, and Rushdie Abu-Alouf, our Gaza correspondent. Rushdie, if I can start with you. From what you know, how much food do people have at the moment?
Well, very little. You know, during the 2 months of ceasefire, Israel used to allow around 400 to 500 trucks every day with loaded with food, medicine, and fuel. But now for the 70 days or over 70 days, nothing is being allowed in. So there is a severe shortage of fuel, severe shortage of water. 25% of the like samples taken from waters that people are drinking every day are contaminated and undrinkable, according to some expert and local authorities in Gaza. There is very few places where still people can locally, you know, grown some fruit and vegetables, but the prices are like 10-15 times higher than the usual price. And most important is that the flour is running out of Gaza. So in some areas, people are grinding, you know, pasta, grinding any sort of, you know, dry food and make it to produce bread. Most of the community kitchen, which used to serve free food for the people, they are running out of gas, they are running out of cooking oil, they are running out of any essential to cook the food. So Gaza is really at the edge of famine. I mean, talking to people every day, people are starving. When I talk to friends and family members and colleagues, even journalists, local journalists in Gaza, they struggle to find food for their children. Even if you have money, and if you have a lot of money in Gaza now, it doesn't matter, because you can't find what you need to feed your family. I've been talking to people throughout the war in the last like 2 years. This is the first time where I feel that the people are really at the edge of famine.
Yolan Nell, Israel and the US have proffered a different solution to getting aid in. Is there worry in the Israeli population about what might be coming if such a big population within Gaza is on the edge of famine?
To be honest, there isn't a huge amount of discussion on it in the Israeli media. The Israeli government has said that the reason it closed all crossings back on the 2nd of March was to put pressure on Hamas to give up the remaining hostages it's holding. And in general, it accuses Hamas of stealing aid, of diverting supplies for its own purposes. Hamas has denied that. The UN and other agencies have been saying that they have strong supervision of the aid that came into Gaza and how they distribute it. But the suggestion has been, which is backed by the US, that there could be this newly created Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, as it's called, that could take over aid distribution. This would be concentrated, according to a document that it's put out, it seems, for potential donors at 4 or 5 distribution points in the south of the Gaza Strip, with part of the stated aim of the Israeli government to really use the fact that aid would only be distributed there as an incentive for people to move to the south, or as bait, as one UN official put it. Now that has proved, as I was indicating earlier, extremely controversial, and the UN and others have said that it does not meet, their humanitarian principles of independence and impartiality, that they will not go along with this. Interestingly, there was a letter that was written by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation in which it suggested, this is in the past day, that there should be the UN and others allowed to pick up humanitarian operations for the time being, but saying that this new foundation could be ready to start work by the end of this month. It's not clear yet if Israel will pick up the idea of some kind of at least a bridging arrangement to let food in, because we've had the UN really pointing out this week that this is a really terrible man-made starvation crisis that is happening in real time before our eyes. And at the same time, you have something like 116,000 metric tons of food aid really lined up outside the crossings that could go into Gaza if Israel was to open them.
Paul Adams, briefly, how pivotal a moment is this for the people of Gaza, worried about their basic food access and security, and the people of Israel still worried about their security?
I think this is a very key moment. Look, as Rushdie just said, we've heard the warnings about starvation and hunger before, throughout this crisis. I think probably more than ever we are on the edge of something very, very serious in the Gaza Strip. All the aid agencies are saying that, and that's why the issue of this alternative mechanism is becoming more and more urgent, because if this situation is not resolved in the coming weeks, then we are going to see something that we have not seen so far throughout more than a year and a half of this crisis.
Paul Adams, Yolan Nell and Rushdie Abu-Alouf, thank you all very much indeed for helping us all to focus and understand on events in Israel and Gaza. This is BBC News.